not our breakout rooms. We're going to have the opportunity after we have a conversation with our guests to go into breakout rooms in smaller groups and have some conversation to debrief what you all heard. And then we'll have some Q&A time at the end with our guests. So if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat throughout, but you can also save them for the Q&A portion at the end of our session. And we'll keep track of that for the end of this evening. We don't expect this to happen, but just a reminder, this is a safe space for folks to be in conversation and learning together. And so we want to make sure that we reiterate that we won't accept any cyberbullying or attempts to intimidate or disrupt the conversation. So if anybody does that, they'll be removed. And lastly, feel free to join us in conversation now on Twitter or even after our programming this evening. Our organization, Achieve the Core, is at Achieve the Core, and you can use the hashtag Core Advocates. And one of our guests, Dr. Trevor Green, has a Twitter, and as do I. I'm Jenny Beltro, so you can tweet with us. So we're going to dive right in, and I'm super excited and happy that we have Dr. Trevor Green and Dr. Marcus Pimpleton with us this evening. They are district leaders. Both this past year were leaders in a rural school district in Washington State, which they'll tell us more about in just a little bit, and also who they are. But we're going to go ahead and just dive right in. And I should say I'm Jenny Beltrami. I am a designer at Student Achievement Partners, and also in Washington State, actually. So it's exciting for me to have some leaders from my state joining us this evening. So we're going to just go ahead and get started with the conversation. And I would love to hear from one or both of you a little bit more about your community, where you live, and what you do there.
Well, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for being...
Oh, Dr. Green, we can't hear you for some reason.
Oh, boy.
We tested it earlier and the sound was working.
I think we can. I can hear him.
Oh, maybe it's just me.
I can hear him.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, as I was going to say, it's just a tremendous honor to be here with you. I realize that nothing is greater than setting aside time to learn from each other and with each other. To start this evening, I do want to acknowledge that I come to you from the Yakima School District, and we rest on the ancestral lands of the 14 Confederate tribes of the Yakima Nation. I will not share with you our entire land acknowledgement, but I do share with you tonight that we have 29 federally recognized tribes in the state of Washington. The largest by population is the Yakima Indian Reservation, which is adjacent to us on the southern end of our border. And we serve 16,000 students. Most of those students are Latinx, and a small, very small 1% population of Native American being outside of the reservation boundaries. And we are a very high poverty area. We are rural, but we're also, I guess, considered urban by our size. But we are surrounded by wineries, grapes, so, you know, great place to come and visit, into wine, those type of things. It's a truly wonderful place to be able to serve and reach out to our community here. Marcus?
Yeah, I'm Marcus Pimpleton. I am currently serving as the Executive Director of Secondary Schools for the Marysville School District, which is on the historic land of the Tulalip. And I'm just really excited to be here and dive into the conversation.
Great, thank you both. So let's just get right into co-design. I know when I started hearing about the concept of like design thinking, co-design, I thought, well, I'm an educator. That's not my industry, my business. But as I've looked on more learning about it, educators are designers every day, whether we're designing instruction or we're designing school systems all the way up to district leaders. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your thoughts about what is co-design, and what did you do in the school district, and how did you do it?
I'll defer to Dr. Pimpleton to start out on the definition.
Well, I mean, I kind of define co-design as creating solutions and analyzing problems in full partnership with the people who are being impacted by the systems that you're intending to design solutions for. And I try to think of it from the very beginning in terms of like the understanding the problems that you're wanting to address, the processing of the data or the information, being full authentic partners in that work from the very beginning of saying, here are the issues that we want to address, to the design of the solutions to address those issues, to the implementation of those solutions, and then to the evaluation of the effectiveness of it. I think it differs from the typical work that we do in school settings, in that a lot of times we will seek information about a problem, but then go off as people who are working in the systems to design the solutions, and not including the people that were supposedly here to serve in that process of designing the solutions. We just listened to their voice and then went and did things to them. So I think co-design differs from that typical approach, in that throughout all phases of the work, you're doing it in partnership with the people who are going to be directly impacted by what you're doing. And for us, we began early on saying, well, what are our hopes and dreams for kids in the Yakima School District? That's the first question that we started with. And then we were saying, what are the barriers that are interfering with our ability to do that? And then, well, what are the problems that which of these barriers do we want to specifically tackle first? And it was an interesting journey with that, because we are programmed to kind of come in with an agenda and to say, this is what we're here to do, and kind of have the answers that we're looking for. And so, we had mixed results trying to free ourselves from that traditional paradigm of how we approach it. But really, it was genuinely asking questions in settings with families, community partners, having a separate all student group that we were asking similar questions with, but then strategically bringing students in to mix with the family and community groups as well, and having system-based actors, people who work in the district, also be involved in both of those settings as well. And at the end, I think, as I was, I think when you're doing co-design work, you're really designing at least two things at any given time. You're designing the community that you're going to be in, and you're wrestling with the tensions of how to create that community space, and what are the rules for operating in this community, and what do we need to do for each other to make this a space. So we're always designing that community, and then the product, what is it that you're trying to create as a community together outside of that or beyond that. And so one of those artifacts was our district equity policy, was one of the concrete things that we spent the entire year working with this group on.
So adding to the question about co-design, and I think it was very aptly described by Dr. Pimpleton, I really begin with a question of how might we shift away from something like prioritizing school events and checking boxes to, quote unquote, fix parents. And then, we end up inadvertently alienating the people that we're trying to serve. And Dr. Pimpleton referenced this approach in what we do as school systems. We typically are very task driven. We have deadlines that we have to achieve. We're always pressed for time, whether you're in a superintendent role, central office role, definitely in that teacher role. There's never enough time to get done what we need to get done. And those lead us to a checklist that gets us away from that co-design model. And the system itself in education is really conditioned, and the way that we interact with those families has conditioned them to think that they really, they can't ask for anything other than maybe some type of incremental acceptance of a school system. And what we were focused on is, how do we design truly with our community, recognizing that we have an area that's very high poverty. We have an area where many of our parents don't speak English, and we're moving along at a pace in education that assumes that everybody is coming from the same experience. And we all know in this room that we have so many different varied experiences. And if we don't honor where people are positioned and create that space for people to express and ask for what they need, then we're just replicating a dysfunctional process. There's a quote that I really love, and if you don't take anything else, I hope that you take this quote with you tonight. And that is that there is really no such thing as the voiceless. There are only the deliberately silenced and the preferably unheard. And we have the power in our positions, all of the people in this room, to determine whether people are going to be deliberately silenced, or we're going to ignore them and have them in that preferably unheard category, or we're going to shift things and co-design, co-create solutions by building upon the dynamics of trust and the power dynamics that exist between schools and the parents and families that we serve. And one of the things that we focus on in co-design is building trust and solidarities and building these relationships above everything first, and then leaning into the tensions that are brought forth once we have that trust built up, so that we can really interrupt and disturb the quote unquote business as usual type of approach that we have in education. And as we did this, and I would also say that we are on a continuum of learning how to do co-design. So we stand before you as flawed educators, and we know that we have to continue to learn and grow in our work around co-design. But as we focused on creating the conditions for people to speak truth to power, and whether we like that term or not, we are in positions of power, definitely depending on the parents that are seeing you in the different types of setting. As we created conditions, we saw that a world was opening up of opportunities that we didn't see previously. And when I first came into the Yakima School District, I knew that we needed to do more beyond saying that we wanted student voice, more than saying that we wanted community voice, and operating in the same type of standard that we do in most of the school systems that I've been in. And thanks to the building out of a racial and educational justice department and bringing in Dr. Pimpleton and sharing a vision that we would both have together and working through co-design, we were able to make tremendous ground and have some success in building these co-design opportunities with students and with different community groups. And all of this ultimately resulted in a phenomenal equity policy that will now determine the direction of our entire district. And that's very exciting for us, knowing that that would have not happened to the degree that it did unless we engaged in co-design.
Tell me, you mentioned a little bit around like position and authority and power, and tell me a little bit more about, I'm just wondering about a little bit more about how you brought folks in, like the process around that, and how you attended to some of those positional dynamics that happen when you bring folks into a school setting, especially folks that have been historically like marginalized by the system.
So I'll jump in, and then Dr. Pimpleton, please do add. So whether we like it or not, when we come into a setting, we represent the school district in the capacity of teacher or whatever role we possess. And that does have implications. And in all of the settings that I've been in, the natural deference of authority is given to the person coming in from the district. And that positions us in a way that from the get-go, from the starting point, we already have people that are invited to the community gathering, to the party, so to speak, that are looking to us for answers. And typically what we do in education, I believe, is we acquiesce. We then assume that role of positionality and jump in right away, trying to lead and get to a consensus on whatever topic we are involved in at the moment. And if we can come into a setting in a more neutral space, then that diffuses that power dynamic and creates a more open conversation that we can then engage in a true, authentic manner. Because, you know, when if we were to all introduce ourselves in this setting, for example, in any educational setting that you're at, we typically start with our name and our job, what we do. And when we're talking with families, I'm not talking about who they are as individuals or who I am. And when I enter into a different space, for example, that is away from the work, so to speak, I'm not introducing myself with my profession. I'm sharing other examples of who I am. You know, I am the son of Lynn and Frank. I am the grandson of Yehola and Haggy. I am, you know, I have this other dynamic of who I am. I have the grandparent of Liam. And this is an entry point with members of a community that provides a common experience that allows us to build upon that component versus the professional dynamic of here I am coming in as an executive director, as a principal, as a teacher, as a superintendent. And I'm not saying that it's not always there, but if we can try to enter in a more neutral mindset and be a participant in co-design and not the leader of co-design, then we can start making that movement towards determining what the challenges are that our community is truly facing and reach a collaborative consensus towards how we then resolve those identified challenges versus coming in with a list of this is the problem ahead of time and here are the solutions. Please tell us which solution is best and then we move forward. That's not how most of our communities operate. That's not how I operate within my personal experience, but that is how I have been conditioned to operate over decades of being in education.
Thank you. Dr. Pimpleton, do you want to add on to that and maybe also thinking about the steps of bringing people in, bringing folks in and the process you went through would be helpful?
Yeah, I think I also just put a link in. I don't know what resources we already have shared, so I'm just, when something comes to my mind, I'm putting in the chat too.
Awesome, thank you.
In the chat is a link to Family Leadership Design Collaborative, which is where we were really trying to learn from the work that they do. One of our professors is a leader in that group, and really, and I don't think that we did necessarily the best job at this, but really starting at the beginning, focusing on relationships, like really our relationship together, what kind of group we wanted this to be, what kind of space we wanted this to be. I think you really can't spend too much time in that space, just designing the relationship and the collaboration that you're wanting to create. And so I feel like we did some of that, and some of the things that Trevor's saying about intentionally trying to avoid using titles, talking about who we are, what brings us to that space outside of job descriptions and roles, and trying to diminish positionality, but really coming in and we not only as system-based actors have been conditioned to interact certain ways, but our families and our students have been conditioned to interact in certain ways. And so it's really naming those tensions and those contradictions. We started very early on saying, this is what typically occurs in these spaces, and we want to be intentional about avoiding those things. But naming those and coming back to them, asking ourselves, how are these things showing up? But being intentional about the kind of relationships and just how we wanted to be working together as a group. And for some of us who are like very outcome focused, that was difficult. That was difficult for me because it would be like 2 or 3 months where it felt like we were having the same conversation. And I'm like, I'm trying to get some work done. And by the end of this year, I want certain results. But it's like, if you're really authentic about the relationship piece, you have to free yourself from some of those, white supremacist ways of engaging in work. And so I wish I could say that we did a great job of that. We tried to do some of that, but we were checking the box at some of the times, or I'll say I was checking the box of doing this. And I think that's a place where you really can't invest too much time in that. You need to do that and spend that time. I think also coming in with some questions is good, but you also need to recognize that you may not be asking the right questions. And so the families and students have to be the sources, not only of the answers to your questions, but are these the right questions? What are the questions that we should be asking? And so starting on early on with really broad, I go back to that. What are hopes and our dreams for kids? How does that compare to what we have said as a district are already our hopes and dreams? What's missing? Whose stories are not being told in here? And then diving into, well, which piece of this elephant do we want to bite off first? And but that was a big part of that. And then making sure that each time that we met, we were coming back to things that were raised in the previous conversations, so that people don't feel like I just say something and then next month, whatever I was doing is going away. No, we're building on the previous work and picking up on those previous conversations. That was all really key. And so we named quite a few different things that we might want to work on and design together. And one of those was the equity policy that the school board had asked us to do. And that ended up taking prominence because we wanted to get that box checked. But there are a lot of other great ideas that came out of that group that is work to be done in the future to develop and design those things that were being identified. So I'm not sure if that's addressing the question that you're asking, but happy to go back to it if there's something I'm missing.
Yeah, no, let's keep talking about the process a little bit. I'm going to just put up the last final kind of question, but I think this is sort of part of the process as well. So you mentioned the equity policy, which I'll share in the chat if folks are interested in that. But what were some, aside from the product that you ended with, like what other outcomes or successes did you have, like with the process of co-designing with the families and communities, and also like what challenges did you have, or what lessons learned from the process that you think would be important to share with us?
So to provide a little bit of context, and I know we didn't maybe do, or I didn't do the best job here at the beginning. When we started the process of reaching out to our students in our community, it was in the form of creating a superintendent student advisory council and inviting students from across our system to be a part of a cohort to engage in the process of co-design, to find out what was concerning them. And tremendous credit goes to Dr. Pimpleton in his role here in our district, because I had this idea of what I needed as far as what I needed and what I wanted to have in the form of student voice. And fortunately, I didn't have any predetermined or conceived ideas of what that needed to be. And in bringing him in and helping to set up this group, what we found is that there were so many different ideas and needs out there with students that if we would have engaged in a way where we were trying to entertain or get a certain outcome, reach a certain outcome in talking with them, we would have missed. And Dr. Pimpleton was phenomenal in the way that he created a space and took the time to have students tell about who they were, who they are, and what concerned them, and what worries they had, and what they imagined a district that is more perfect than what we are in could be. And that permission to dream from the get-go created opportunities to delve into ideas about mental health and consider what we could do to provide supports in areas that we hadn't considered, and to bring people in to engage with our students about things that were concerning them in that moment versus what we, during a pandemic, were hearing from the media about our students. And it wasn't through parents, it wasn't through teachers, it was creating that dynamic where it was truly open and we weren't concerned about an outcome at the very end. Now, what Dr. Pimpleton did refer to is we stepped back out of co-design when we had an idea of coming up with a product of an equity policy. In the ideal co-design, we're not entering a space with an outcome that we have to have. That is the typical way that we operate. But what I'm trying to point out is, even though we had one product in the equity policy that we knew that we had to come up with, there were other opportunities along the way that created rich dialogue and opportunities to then create more profound conversation this coming year as we continue to build out the cohort that we're involved with now with the students. And we did the same thing with then a larger group, an equity coalition themselves, which had representatives of students and of our community faith-based partnerships, business leaders, and we're able to engage with them in more of the work around the equity policy so that we were doing less of that with the student group.
Dr. Pimpleton, you want to add or maybe share other outcomes aside from the product? I know Dr. Green shared some other considerations that now you have to consider, but were there other positive outcomes, other lessons learned that you think are important?
Well, I think that now Yakima has a core group of students who are really fired up about this work. So when we got to the end of the policy work, which was our kids were doing a large chunk of the leading of the writing of that equity policy. They were doing one-on-one meetings with school board members to sell the policy to school board members and could really speak to why they were behind what was in there. But at the end of the year, these kids asked for a meeting with me and Superintendent Green, and then they presented a proposal for a summer internship to be equity interns and to continue doing the work. And so that was a really exciting outcome to see when you're doing real authentic work with young people that they see themselves in and see as important to them. They take it beyond where where you could have really imagined, because I did not imagine these kids coming back with this. We are one of the, as Superintendent Green was kind of alluding to, we started with two groups. One was about 50 students, which I emailed every middle and high school student in the district, inviting them if they wanted to be a part of this group. And if they could put a complete sentence together about why they wanted to be in the group, then I put them in the group. If they said, I don't know, then I didn't put them in the group. But if they gave any kind of a reason for wanting to be in there, that's how they got into the group. And so this group was saying early on, mental health was their number one drive. And so we spent the whole year with them having conversations specifically about what kind of supports do we need to build for mental health. We brought in counselors. The students gave very candid feedback to the counseling teams about what was working for them and what was not working for them and their negative experiences with dealing with school counselors. The counselors then invited students to come in and be a part of their professional development work. So this ended up, there was a lot of work that student group was doing as a result of conversations that would start in that space, and then it would lead into a great deal of other work after that as a result. And so now we're doing some Sources of Strength is being launched. Sources of Strength program is being launched, multiple high schools to address mental health things. They're starting a Purple Lanyard project at one of the high schools. They are involved in the counseling, professional development work. So there's a lot of stuff that came as a result of that. With our community group, what we found is that our students are more ready to run than some of our community members. And so with the community group, there was a lot of why policy? What is policy going to do? What's going to be different? And so that group really needed a much slower pace, but our kids were ready to run. And so and I'll say me, wanting to have this policy done, ran with the student group to get it done and drug the adults along with us that we needed to drag along. Ideally, that's not the way we would have been able to slow down at the pace. But these kids were really fired up. And so, I'm torn, right? So, because I'm living in this too, where I want to check the boxes and get some good work done and say, this is what we did. And I'm knowing we can always go back and revisit stuff that we've done. but that was really, I think these kids being really fired up about the work and owning the work and really the language of defining what they expect this from the school system and from their academic experience. That was to me the most tremendous outcome, policy or no policy. What I would,
That's great.
the challenge that I'm faced with is that I really want us to do a better job in terms of the community piece. And we've made some decisions to help do that as well, including the hiring of a family community engagement specialist to help in that work in Yakima to do a better job of really listening and and empowering community voices to set the agenda for the conversation, so that it's not us coming in saying, here's what we're going to discuss, but we're involving our community and saying, here's the discussion topic and here's who we really want to be at the table, more similar to what was actually happening with that student group.
Great. I just want to, I heard you say something that I think is really, that I was thinking about, which is different groups that are involved in the co-design process have different needs or different, like you said, different pace, needing to go at a different pace. And so that seems like a lesson learned, is attending to where folks are in the process and responding to them. And in a true co-design model, you would respond to them and where they're at, instead of like necessarily, which is what you sort of had to do, which was drive forward regardless, right?
And it's a challenge because what we would, like, I recognize early on the needs of our community participants, especially our monolingual Spanish speaking community. The needs were very different than what the students need and the kind of conversations the students could have. But when we would ask the question, should we split this up, there was a desire not to do that. So people want to have that authentic connection where everyone's together, and they want it to be mixed groups and having, monolingual Spanish with monolingual English. Like that was a desire, because we're kind of, that's where our heart is we want everyone in it, everyone together. But then there are challenges of differentiating when you do it that way, because there's a lot of just content about the way that schools historically operate, and being able to reimagine that requires different discussions with different groups and constituencies. And so I think I should have pushed earlier for more. So yes, we're going to keep this space where everyone's at the table, but we're also going to do some work in some more separated out silos that's specific to the needs of these different groups. I think that's a lesson that I would learn, but people also have a limited amount of time, bandwidth. One of the things we're hearing from community members is maybe we need to start paying community members to be there for those meetings, because we're asking for a great deal of your time. And so when you start to add more, you're asking for more. There's also benefits to having consistency between who's in those groups. So it's not just like a broad and every month, which community members want to be a part of this now, but like I said, we need to build off our previous conversation. So it's a lot, it's a messy, and so we're still trying to figure it out.
Great. I want to get folks into breakout groups in just about a minute to give them enough chance to, and share some resources and give folks a chance to process and debrief. But just quickly, I'm wondering, for those who are with us that are classroom teachers, because you've been both speaking at a district level, do you have any thoughts around like this process brought down to like a classroom or a school-based level, and any thoughts about co-design with families and communities at that level of the system?
Yeah, I mean, well, sorry, I don't know if Trevor wants to jump in there, but for me, it was like, I spent most of my time as a teacher. I've only been an administrator for the last 5 years. And this was just, what do I do in a band classroom to get kids owning their band experience? Well, I'm going to try that on a district level. So I think the things that you would do with a group of students to really get them talking and sharing about what they want and having them own their classroom experience, just do that, have that same authenticity with in other circles that you're in. I don't think it's really all that different to go one way or the other. You're just sincerely interested in what people have to say, and then be responsive to it and help them be a part of responding to what it is that they say.
Great, thank you. We'll have time in just a bit for after we come out of breakout groups for more questions. So if some of you that are joining us have still some questions about the process or wondering anything about what Dr. Pimpleton or Dr. Green did, feel free to save those. But we're going to give you a chance to go into breakout groups and chat with the other folks that are in the room with us and who are here. So feel free to introduce yourselves, where you live, where you're from, and what your job is and what your role is. And then feel free to we're going to give you about 10 minutes to just share with one another what is sticking with you right now, what questions do you have, and maybe even have some conversation about how you might want to incorporate some of the ideas you heard into your role or your learning space this coming school year. And I will just share, oh, thank you, Joy. So my colleague Joy just put in the chat a link to some other resources we've curated for you around co-design with families and communities. So there's actually a lot of resources there for those of you who are interested in digging into this a little bit more. But we're going to go ahead and head into breakout rooms and have about 10 minutes of time for some conversation amongst one another. And then we'll see you in about 10 minutes for a question and answer time. Maybe I'll stop sharing so we can see one another. And I will post the links in the chat again for all of you. Maybe I will start with a question and we'll see if, oh, here's a question here. The policy, does it include a policy for trans and non-binary students and bonus for staff?
I really encourage to take time to look at our equity policy. It outlines the opportunities that we have in front of us to then put in the procedures that will help us realize the overarching policy goals. So that question about, what was it about, a quick question about trans and non-binary students, that I do believe will be fleshed out and addressed throughout other policies that we will implement, but not specifically in this equity policy.
Thank you. Can I ask sort of a follow-up question to that? Is I know you talked about continuing the work with the students and even the family and community groups. Is that, do you envision that being continued work with like the policy and how that policy gets put into action? Do you envision it being like other things that have come up, continuing the process of organic co-design by where you may not even know what the problems are that you're trying to solve? All of that?
Yeah, I think that we have to be very intentional now moving forward, because we do now have an equity policy, and there is ample opportunity for those who have interest in seeing that realized to involve themselves in different portions that would result in procedures to affect systemic change across our district. At the same time, we need to make sure that that's done in a model of true co-design, and that may have to delineate and be a little bit separate depending on how we approach it. I do think I'll take advantage of this opportunity, though, to share that when I came forward in the district, this is the start of my third year in district, and we went into a closure during my first March. So I feel like I'm a first-year superintendent, but I've really had this prolonged opportunity to engage with the community. And in so doing, I reflected upon my first year. And one of the things that I did that was really well-intended, and so this is, please, be gentle with my vulnerability here. But when I went forward into our community and was in front of all of our Spanish-speaking parents, or a large majority, over about 200 parents in one of our middle schools, and I am bilingual Spanish speaker as well. One of the things that I wanted to do was get to the bottom of what the issues were that were concerning our community. And this is where I can see that I made an error in, and I didn't understand what co-design was or how I could use that as a authentic way to come up with the issues, but also then engage community around the solution themselves. And I did probably what people always do. And I kind of, what are some of the issues? And I really opened it up to an environment that I'm ashamed to say was putting really trauma on display in our community. So here I was with monolingual Spanish speakers, and they're telling me the issues that happened to them personally with their child in a setting with other parents. And I look back at that and I just cringe, because that is actually a way to reinforce the concept of power in systems, and in the systems themselves, and in my position as an actor in the system. So that is a big miss. That was a big miss on my part. And going back, I know that I will, it's been now 1.5 years since that moment, since we were in person, but I definitely will never go back into a situation now that I've had the time to reflect and learn about co-design and what I mistakenly do, trying to get away from the norm that actually reestablishes that power dynamic. So you've given me that opportunity that I didn't have before to reflect on how we tend to, in school systems, create those moments where trauma is on display and then don't have a response to it, or we become that position of, now I've shared that with you, what are you going to do with that information as superintendent, as principal, as teacher, as whoever you are? And that again reinforces that dynamic, instead of saying, okay, let's talk about the issues that you see in the school or in the system that that is not helpful in goals that you have for your child. There are other ways to engage, and I missed out on that opportunity my first year.
Thank you for that. That's super. Thank you for sharing that with us and being vulnerable, and that lesson learned is really important. There were a couple other questions in the chat, but I know that we're running out of time and I want to be respectful of folks who need to get off at the top of the hour. So I'm going to share a couple of just closing slides very quickly. And then if you have a chance, maybe we can stay on for just a minute or two and answer maybe one more question. But we'd love for you to follow us on Eventbrite. We have several upcoming events in August and September that will be great. A 2-part webinar series around social, emotional, and academic development in the math classrooms, which I'll be a part of leading both of those. And we have some great educators that are going to be with us to share in those webinars. And then our next Coffee and Conversation is September 22nd. And it's called Decolonizing Instruction with Maribel Gonzalez. And we don't have the registration up on Eventbrite for that yet, but if you follow us on Eventbrite, you'll see it when it pops up really soon. Also, I just want to say that we really appreciate feedback. Every one of these Coffee and Conversations is an opportunity for us to learn. So if you have a few minutes, we'd really love for you to share with us your feedback about your time with us this evening. And also we have a sign up for our Core Advocate Network, which is another way. We don't spam you with a ton of emails, but it's another way for you to get regular communication from our organization about the professional learning opportunities that we offer online. Almost all of them are free and open for anybody who wants to join. So we would love for you to sign up. And great. So if you need to sign off, we understand, or want to, but we maybe we'll stay on just for another minute if that's all right. Dr. Green, I think you said we'll stay on maybe just to answer one more question, which has to do with any thoughts on scaling this to even like a bigger, like national level. Somebody had asked that question.
The first thing we need to do is scale it in our own system, and it's going to take a tremendous amount of time to do that. Dr. Pimpleton referred to us bringing on some people now to work around family engagement, community engagement. And in thinking about that, one of the things that we're committed to is slowing down to do it right and not bringing people on board and immediately thrusting them into these ideas of what family involvement should be. So I have now, because of the work that Dr. Pimpleton did here, I have 2 people coming on board in the next month. And we the first job for us is to onboard them in a way to truly understand what co-design is. And that means taking significant time to study the resources that were given to you, that were shared with you tonight, to have the conversation about what are we doing to cause damage in our communities and how can we move away from that, and not immediately thrusting them into a situation to bring more people to the table when we don't know how to navigate that situation at the current moment. So I do anticipate that we're going to have about 1 or 2 months of very slow learning that will happen. And it goes to the saying that I put in there: if we don't do it right, when are we going to ever do it over? And the reality is that we don't. We have to make it a priority to do it right the first time, even though it's counter to everything that we do in education by slowing down so significantly to engage people in a true process of what's important to them, and then moving toward a solution with them. Again, and Dr. Pimpleton shared this, without any preconceived notions about what that solution may be. And I think, publicly here, I would like to, again, thank Dr. Pimpleton for his extensive work in the Yakima School District, congratulate him on his new position, but for him to consistently have in front of us, we can't enter any space with the idea of what the answer should be. We have to be truly open to our community and those possibilities. And we've seen that play out with our community. We've seen that play out with our students. Similarly to what Dr. Pimpleton said, if you would have asked me at the very beginning of what my vision was for our Superintendent Student Advisory Council, and now what the result is, I would not imagine the result would happen within 10 years, let alone 1 year, where we have students that are saying, can we conduct an internship, an equity internship, and then write out what that internship would be. And then actually this was on Monday, they stood in front of our entire leadership team, over 100 leaders, and shared with them what they had been doing during the summer. They shared about the equity policy. They shared about what they envisioned, how they envisioned principals engaging their own students and their buildings in the process to make significant change throughout our system.
Is just the most wonderful way to end our evening together. I'm feeling inspired by that story, and framing up a leadership identity for students by giving them the opportunity and putting them in that situation. So thank you so much, both of you, for your work. Thank you for being with us this evening, for sharing with the audience that was with us and those that are going to watch later on this coffee and conversation. Just really great ideas. Thank you all for joining us. I hope that you find the resources that we shared valuable for digging in even further to the idea of co-design. And we just really appreciate your time this evening, and hope we'll see you all again at one of our future events.